right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at how you solve quadratic equations by completing the square. And so up until this point, we've learned how to solve quadratic equations by factoring, which is what we did last chapter. We also looked at, in the last few days, how you can graph and solve them. Remember, that was where the zeros occurred, and you used the graphing software. And now we're going to look at how you can complete the square. There is also an additional way called the quadratic formula that we will, in fact, hit as well. Okay, so there's all these different ways to solve quadratics. And so first of all, before we actually get into completing the square, we're going to do kind of a pre-step. And notice what it says. It says, find the value of c that makes x squared plus 4x plus c a perfect square trinomial. So if you remember a perfect square trinomial, an example of a perfect square trinomial was this. Okay, remember how we found it was a perfect square trinomial? We looked, the first and the last had to be what? What did the first term and the last term have to be? Squares. And so then what I did is I took the square root of each. And what I did then is multiplied the x and the 3. And when I multiply x and 3, I get what? 3x. If the middle term is double that, it was a perfect square trinomial. So let's see. Let's go backwards. So I already have this number here. Okay, I have this number here. So I'm going to go this way first. So how do you get from 6 to 3? What do? You divide by 2, right? So if I divide 4 by 2, what do I get? 2. So really this would be 2x, right? If I divide that by 2. And so then I know that this term here has to be an x, right? What does c have to be? 2. But now notice, here I'm at this 3 step here. I have to go back to that number right here. So what am I going to do with that? Square it. So really, what does c have to equal? 4. So let's revisit those steps again. What did you do with the 4x? You took what? Divided it by 2, so took half of it. And then what did you do with that 2? Not multiple, you squared it. So let's review again. So what I do is I take half of the x term, and then I square it. Okay, half of the x term, and then you square it. So let's go ahead and look at this term. Find the value of c that makes r squared minus 8r plus c a perfect square trinomial. So I want you to do those 2 steps we just talked about. I'm going to go around and check your answers. R squared minus 8r plus c. What is c? What? Nope, not right now. Oops. Yep, there you go. So we take half of what term?
8.
The 8. So what's half of 8? 4. So basically like negative 4r. So then I know that I've got negative 4. So I'm going to square negative 4. And what do I get? 16. So that's the value of c that makes that a perfect square trinomial. No, that's just a rule. So. Okay, I want you to do another one. What is c? What is c to make that a perfect square trinomial? What is c? Yep. Yes, good. Yes. All right, so what did we get c to be? 25, because we take half of 10, which is 5, square it, and then we get 25. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually start by completing the square. Now you already wrote these down, so we're going to go through these steps and we're going to talk about them. The first step to completing the square You move all terms involving x to one side of the equation, everything else to the other side. So when all is said and done, in order to start completing the square, everything with x is on one side, everything else on the other. Okay? Step 2, take half of the x term, square it, and add to both sides. Where does this blue step look familiar? We just did it. We just did the blue step. Okay? And then step 3, rewrite the side involving x, then solve the equation. All right, so let's start. Solve by completing the square. So the first step, everything with x is on one side, everything else on the other. So what do you need to do?
Subtract 12.
Subtract 12. Now, if I were you, I would write these down step by step as we go through. Okay? So the very first thing, what you're going to do is you're going to subtract 12 from both sides. Now, when you do this, you need to kind of duplicate how I do this on the board because I'm going to leave a space. So you see where I left a space? I left it there for a reason. And you're going to see what that reason is. So that was the purple step. That's the first step. X is on one side in descending order, everything else on the other. Step 2, we take half of the x term. What's half of negative 6?
-3.
-3. So here's how I'm going to write it. So instead of writing it below, I'm going to write it beside. And then what did I do with that number once I took half of it?
Squared.
Squared it. Now one of the things about equations is that whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. Except for, you know what I'm going to do? What is -3 quantity squared? 9. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add that. It's the same number though. Now you're probably wondering, why did she leave it like that? You'll see. Because now what I need to do is rewrite this in factored form. Remember how we factored? Okay, but how I wrote it is I wrote it an easy way to factor. All I'm going to do is take whatever the first term is squared, which is what? X, whatever the last term is squared, which is what? -3. So see, now notice why I put that negative there? Because that negative makes a big difference. So I take whatever the first term is squared, whatever the last term is squared, equals. On the right side, what do I get? 16. Very good. Okay, now I've got something that's squared. How do you undo something that's squared? Take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. What's the important thing to remember whenever you take the square root? Plus or minus. So on the left, what happens to the square roots? They cancel, and I'm left with x minus 3. On the right, what's the square root of 16? 4. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write this as two quantities. X minus 3 equals positive 4, and x minus 3 equals what? Negative 4. So now I need to solve each of these individually. What do you get over here if you add 3 to both sides? I get x to equal 7. Good. What's my other solution here going to be? -1. Good. Now, this is all we're going to cover today. Those two things. We've got 2 more we're going to look at in class to make sure you got it down, but that's as far as we're going to go. So we're going to work through another one together, and then the last one you're going to do for me. All right, so here's our second equation. So this is going to be one of those you're going to want to follow along again. Because like I said, that last one you're going to end up doing in class on the board. What do you do first? Subtract the 3. Very good. So I'm left with x squared minus 12x equals 5. What do I do now? Half of -12. What's half of -12? -6. So remember how I'm going to write it? I'm going to write it this way. -6. What do I do with that -6 then? Square it. And then what do I do? Add it to the other side. So I could put -6 squared, or I could put 36. What's the next step, folks?
Equal x squared minus 6.
X minus 6, yep. Quantity squared. Good. On the right side, what do you get?
41.
41. Good.
What?
What do you do now?
Well, where is
Take the square root. Plus or minus. Okay. So, what do you get on the left side?
X minus
6 equals plus or minus. What is the square root of 41 to 2 decimal places, please?
6.4.
So now how you're going to do this is you can just type this in on a calculator. Okay, but the square root of 41 is 6.40. Okay. So I get 6.40. What do I do now?
You have to have plus or minus.
X minus 6 equals what? 6 positive 6.4, and what else? Okay. How do you solve it now? Add 6, very good. And so what do you get X to equal? 12.4, very good. That's your first solution. What do you get now?
0.40.
Close. Negative 0.40. Nice job, way to catch that negative. All right, once again, now we're going to do one, except for you're going to go through and do this one step by step in class. Okay? Same thing over and over again. Okay, the light gray pen is out. So, somebody needs to start. So what am I going to do?
Yeah, she didn't put it on Ethan's corner of tickets.
Does somebody know what the first step is? Go ahead, play. Grab it. Go. Okay. Perfect start. Okay, now this one, if you remember, the first step is to move everything over to one side of the equation on the x's. It already is. So you don't have to do anything. So you can actually jump to step 2. Okay, so here we go. Somebody needs to pick it up. Next step. That's fine. The gray pen's by Maddie. Okay, so the next step. I'll tell you if you're wrong. I'll stop you. Almost. Not one thing. Yep. There you go.
16. Okay. Got it. 5.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, sorry. I'm
7,
not good with
7,
math.
7.
What's 16 minus 1?
7.
There you go. All right.
Let's do that.
Okay, 7. All right, next. I don't care who's going to do next. Somebody from the back. Somebody from the back.
AG touched it last.
What are you left up on the left side? Okay, equals. Okay, 2.65. There you go. Yep, 2.65. Good job. Okay, somebody next. Okay. Okay, who's gonna finish up for us? It's fine. Okay, real quick. Let's go ahead and add. If I add, oh shoot. Yeah, if I add, this was a -4, so if I add 4 to both sides, I end up getting what value? That one, if I take -2.65 and add 4, I should get 1.35. Yep. And then here, if I add 4 to both sides, I end up getting 6.65 positive. So those should be your two answers.
How are you gonna do a decimal point?
Because this one you add 4,
So how does
this one you add 4 here. Because this one is 4 minus 2.65. If you take $4 and you subtract $2.65, you get $1.35. If you take $4 and you add $2.65, you get $6.65. Okay? So that's why it's important. Make sure you kind of write those steps out. Now this is what you need to do. Remember what I said, you're going to break this down. Now tomorrow eventually where our goal is going to be is to look at how you have, like if you have 2x squared minus 4x plus 5. How would we complete the square with that? So with the number in front of that x squared. But for right now, this is what I need you to do. So if you want to go ahead and turn in your book to page 577 so we can look at those together. Okay, page 577. The first, I believe, 9 problems, are nothing more than what we started with, finding the value of C. So those are fairly easy. And then what you end up doing is you end up having 5 completing the square problems. Now if you get going now, you should be mostly done by the time the bell rings. So I encourage you to get going.